I'm Evan. Um, about exactly 2 years ago, I made a big video, sort of like this one, and launched my new ambitious comic book project, Third Voice. How's that been going? I think pretty well. Maybe you have seen me incessantly posting about it every time I update it every Monday. Maybe you've read it. Or maybe you're just sort of keeping it in the back of your head to read it later. Either way, thank you. I'm still working on Third Voice. I'm updating it with several pages or one scene each week, except for I took a break for 2 weeks just now. Um, it is really most of what I am doing lately. What a weird video that was. Maybe you should watch it if you haven't. What a weird moment that was 2 years ago. I had such a desperate, tenuous faith in this project I wanted to do, kind of a louder and more obsessive faith than I've had at the start of other big projects in the past. I was hoping, I still hope, that I could double down on some ridiculous, ambitious ideation in this area, and that I had enough audience interest and goodwill to make that a productive and feasible direction to go in. I was hoping also that there was some avenue in doing this towards building an audience in a way that has gotten kind of difficult over the past several years. In the intervening 730 days, I have drawn 569 pages of Third Voice. I've published these pages on the internet, freely readable on a variety of platforms, with a focus on my own website, rice-boy.com. I have finished the first 379-page book of the story, entitled Spondule and Navichet. I have gotten maybe halfway through the second book of the story, entitled The Face and Shadow Side. I have posted on Patreon a really enormous amount of related material, hundreds of development drawings, and some, tens of thousands of words of notes as I've worked through the comic. I have witnessed and participated in staggeringly dense and thoughtful conversations surrounding the comic on its designated Discord server. I have answered at great length over 50 letters in the ongoing Third Voice letter column, Third Voicemail, that I publish on the site. My brother Lewis has made several songs as a part of an irregular rolling soundtrack to the comic, building an aesthetic in dialogue with the comic and with me that I am really extremely excited about. I have been nominated for an Eisner Award for Third Voice, and I have won an NCS Rubin Award for it. I have figured out new ways of working at every level. I have found huge new interesting areas in this story made available to me by virtue of how I've decided to make and publish it. I have worked on very little else over the course of these 2 years, aside from making these hundreds of pages of a graphic novel. So now you have an idea. That launch video is slightly obnoxious and performative, I think. Me trying to effectively sell you on a big story that doesn't actually exist yet. Like a pitch to a publisher, but aimed at an audience. So there's a lot of vague stuff and a lot of posturing and making promises. I don't really like doing that. I like making the thing and having it speak for itself as much as possible. But anyway, now it's out there to some extent. Now it's something. It's starting to be something. So you can see what I mean. Third Voice is a fantasy adventure story set in an ambiguously fantastical post-apocalyptic world with a focus on two itinerant scavengers just barely understanding the big picture of what's happening around them. That isn't really a synopsis. I don't really have a synopsis yet. It is what it is. Third Voice is formally and tonally new for me in some ways. If you're familiar with the stuff I've made before, you probably know what I mean. It is a sustained narrative, I want to emphasize. It's one big thing, but it's segmented. There are separate books, and we're only on the second of those. So maybe you're beginning to get a sense of what I mean by segmented and what through lines will continue throughout the thing and build. It is also, in a lot of ways, built around improvisation on my part. Um, you can see now kind of what I mean by that too, maybe. There's a structure and there's momentum, but I've opened up a lot of spaces inside of it that I wasn't aware of at first in ways that I don't think I would have been able to do before having done, Vatu, basically. I laid out from the start that I'm trying to apply everything I've learned doing this stuff since 2006 to this project. I have moved away from the mindset that says that the polished, internally consistent, one and done graphic novel is the ultimate form of comics. My career, my life has mostly been in serialization, in the long-term spaces provided, built up and recontextualized by an audience in this way. When I think about what it's been like so far, a lot of it is a lot like the work I'd been doing before. But the biggest, loudest way it's different is I feel actually involved in those spaces with what I'm doing. The story is more alive and richer to me than previous projects. Things I hear back from readers mean more. It feels like we're in conversation more. And it is gratifying, of course, that I'm hearing more from them than I have in the past, I think. There's a sort of mystery angle to a lot of third voice, I think. There's like little detailed systems and things in the background. There's big picture stuff that fits together but isn't directly attended to by the protagonists. And this has been something in particular that's been exciting to see readers talk through. On the more granular level, my processes generally are somewhat more structured than they used to be. Building the update schedule around more self-contained scenes makes a lot more sense to me. It's kind of wild that I was for so long just publishing one page at a time. 4 or 6 or 8 pages in a week can be a little ridiculous, but mostly I've been able to get into a good rhythm with it. It helps me think and write through this project to operate more in the indivisible unit of a several page scene. I've really changed my approach to drawing more than I thought I would do. I leaned on the brush to draw basically everything for so many years, in part, I guess, out of inertia, but dividing the work now between brush and G-nibs has helped me be smarter with it. There's a lot of sorts of drawing that basically weren't open to me until I started using the G-nib more centrally, but it's a process. I could still change my approach in other ways, of course. I don't want to get sucked into anxiety about visual consistency to too self-destructive an extent. I'm also using Rapidograph technical pens for lettering and panel borders now. My mom got me these. Can you believe how quickly microns run out? Rapidographs are a lot better in a lot of ways. Coloring goes basically as it's always gone for me. Not much interests me to talk about there. I really like doing a whole scene at once, keeping the emotional rhythm more alive like that, keeping it consistent and executed as one train of thought, pencils of the whole thing, and then letters, and then inks, then colors. The couple of times I've done more than one scene at once, it's felt like maybe too much to do in one pass like this. Generally, I have been able to keep up with this thing and put it forth in a way that feels like valuable and substantial. The basic career mechanism here has been so far to emphasize Patreon more and to present this comic in a way that makes a $2 a month subscription there feel worth it. Is it worth it? That's your call. But the Patreon has been doing pretty well. It has allowed me to focus on this a lot more than I would have otherwise been able to. And it's nice to see so many of you there. Subscribing to that is still, of course, an option for you if you're interested in that. The comic itself isn't paywalled or anything, but there's a bunch of development material and stuff like that, and it's a way of directly supporting this comic's continued existence in the uncompromising sort of way I am trying to make it exist. So yes, generally I'm feeling good about it, but there are certain things that have not turned out as well or as grandly as I pitched them to you so far. I was thinking of a more ongoing series of multimedia objects alongside the comic, mostly voice-acted bits or simple animatics or something like that. My thinking was just making it take up more space, sort of, but I haven't really had time or inclination or money to do that, basically, aside from occasionally paying Lewis to go through some back and forth to do a bit of soundtrack. You know, I guess the main thing here is the comic, and I'm an individual, and I'm not able to pay a bunch of people to make stuff for me, so I guess that's the way that is. I think I was kind of trying to, express my excitement about this thing in a bigger way than I can articulate just through comics. I don't know. I'll be working on this comic for a long time, though, and I'll keep thinking about that. The Patreon configuration has also changed a bit from my initial thinking. I was at first trying to launch a big new monthly thing for the $5 a month level where I do live streamed drawing and talking presented as a sort of event every month. This didn't get terribly much interest, so I've landed on the $5 level, having access to big passages of notes on each update of the comic as I publish it. I'm still figuring out, philosophically, what I'm doing with Patreon. I want it to be a thing that's just quietly available if people want to support the comic, and I think that's generally how readers have been seeing it. But I'm also trying to put forth some amount of material regularly to make it work as a more transactional thing, if people want to look at it like that. You know, it's a dialectic. Both of these at once and neither. 8-1. The big picture here, though, is the internet and how it's all changed, and the world of independent artists on the internet and how that's changed. The basic stuff of making a comic independently and making a little website and building an audience using whatever platforms and networks are available and building a career or a part of a career like that, that used to just be how we did it. But now it's feeling more and more like an explicitly ideological project. It feels like taking a stand against the captured platform-focused logic of the new internet in ways that I never intended for it to seem. I've become like an ideologue about this stuff just by virtue of living and working through this period of transition. What do we do now, we independent artists? It feels now like the move we made years ago to dive into social media and try to game its systems to build and maintain an audience. That feels like a bargain, like a sort of bargain that we made now. We helped sacrifice the old logic of handmade independent spaces and organic human networks of sharing and communicating. By using all these platforms, we helped them dismantle that older thing. But would I have been able to keep all this rolling if I hadn't? I don't think so. And here I am still using them. Here I am acutely aware of how expansively Webtoons.com, for instance, has corrupted audience and creator conception of what a career in comics is, but I'm still using it. I'm mirroring Third Voice there and a bunch of other platforms because it's where a lot of people are. I'm nervous also about leaning on Patreon so much, itself a platform outside of its users' control. I'm nervous about the seeming collapse of social media as a governing logic, because what's next? We're not going to go back, I don't think. So, anyway, there's a million little trade-offs like that, I guess, and there's some I've made that my colleagues haven't, and vice versa. And it's difficult to be ideological here while I'm also being a careerist about it, like I'm operating within this logic that is always going to push me in the direction of the most cynical move. Well, it's another dialectic, I guess. As I'm mostly able to chug along with this thing, the main thing on my mind is the comic. And I'm generally able to feel optimistic enough about my audience remaining in contact with it to not have to stress out too much about it. The second passage of Third Voice will be done in some number of months, and maybe it's in the ballpark of the same size as the first one, 400-ish pages. From there, we sort of spin outwards and start getting into the raw, big picture material that I initially came up with for Third Voice and that I mostly haven't touched so far. The third passage will be called Zem Renovan. The fourth passage will be called The Artifact. The fifth passage will be called Champion's Blood, or something like that. And it will continue past that, but we get to it when we get to it. I would say that 2 years and 600 pages of this thing is really not very much of it, to be honest. I would also like to make a book, like a print book. I've talked about this a little bit elsewhere. I feel unable to commit to keeping a huge multi-volume thing in print, but I'd at least like to self-publish the first book at some point in the future. It's slowly coming together, you know. The section of the video that originally went here, I wrote it and got so far as to actually film it, but I don't feel comfortable with it, so I'm rearranging the material here a little bit. This is chronologically the last thing I'm filming for this video. What was I uncomfortable about? I was making big sort of specific commitments about the future of the comic and its scale, and I guess I have gotten nervous about feeling on the hook about them. I want the commitments to be in the text and to be sort of implicit in the sort of story it is. I want to preserve as much as possible the feeling of openness and momentum for this project, telling you when it's going to end, how it's all going to happen. That feels too constricting to me. I've moved through these projects in the past by just opening up space implicitly for them and following through with them in a way that's mostly engaging for me. I never, got married to these things. The extent to which I obliged myself to them is the extent to which they started to feel like a slog. Does that make sense? I don't know. What is commitment? Is it promising to keep doing something past the point of wanting to do it because you're beholden to some external structure, some dominating or threatening logic? I am beholden to structures, of course. I have made this my job, of course. But I guess I'm trying to be careful about how I'm engaged with it, how I keep it active in my head, how I articulate my commitment to it moment to moment. Okay, that is probably as divorced as I'm going to get in this video. Thank you for bearing with me. What the fuck else is there to do? Every institution in pop cultural media feels like it's falling apart right now. Every platform, every publisher is becoming more cynical, more openly dismissive of the work done by the artists they profit off of. This isn't a momentary incidental crisis. This is a relentless cascading assault that's been going on over the course of my entire life. What optimism there is, to me, is in the areas of smaller institutions and creative scenes, worker-owned publications and spaces, and independent artists. Comics still feel like a new, volatile, quick-moving medium to me. Our conception of what's possible in comics has hugely changed a bunch of times over the past century of the existence of comics as a pop cultural medium. It's still a revelation to me that we can do things like this in such an unmediated way. It's more and more of a revelation, kind of. Unmediated, what do I mean by that? Obviously, the mediation is louder and louder, more destructive in some ways. But, at least you don't have to spend thousands of dollars printing and distributing your little serialized book to tell a long format, self-published, self-directed story in the medium. That is still true. Teaching a class for the past year and a half has sort of helped me wrap my head around some of this. There's a bleak kind of antisocial relief that one could feel, I think, having started a career in independent art at a more hospitable moment in the culture and in the history of the internet. It's all fucked now, but I've got my little grandfathered in stability. What good is that, though? How does that help us think about any of this productively? It's still possible. Nothing is nailed down. The logics of these things change dramatically. The logics of platforms and depredation that have dominated my every creative space for the past decade have holes in them and unsustainabilities, right? I think. And what remains true, I think, is that creative work is a way of communicating clearly and hugely between people. More clearly, less mediatedly than language sometimes, even. I think that's the point. So, thank you for reading.